Thomas Green had always believed that loyalty was a currency, perhaps the rarest one in a world built on ambition and greed. For over 20 years, he had poured every ounce of himself into Empire Holdings, a titan of industry that dominated the skyline of London's Canary Wharf. His sacrifices were not small. He missed birthdays, funerals, anniversaries, and countless evenings where the city sparkled beyond his office window, forever just out of reach. He had trusted the promises, the subtle nods, the veiled assurances from Sir Edward Barnes, the legendary founder and CEO. Edward was a man of charisma and steel, his words weaving a future where Thomas would no longer be an employee, but a partner, an heir to the empire. It was all within grasp, so close Thomas could almost taste it. That morning, the sky hung low and heavy, pressing the city beneath thick layers of grey clouds. The rain began before dawn, a cold and relentless drizzle that seeped into the cracks of the ancient city streets. Thomas arrived early, as always, his polished shoes tapping quietly against the marble floors of Empire Holdings' grand lobby. The receptionist smiled nervously as he passed, an omen Thomas was too preoccupied to notice. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was frigid. The long mahogany table stretched into the distance, lined with men and women who wore familiar faces but strangers' eyes. The air smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. Sir Edward stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "Thomas," he said, voice clipped and formal. "Please sit." Thomas did as he was told, a knot tightening in his stomach. The meeting was short, brutal. No discussions, no gratitude, no honor for decades of service. Only a single sheet of paper slid towards him, heavy with finality. "Your services are no longer required." For a moment, Thomas thought he had misheard. The world around him tilted slightly. He opened his mouth to speak but found no words willing to leave. The faces turned away, avoiding his gaze, as if he were a ghost already fading from their memories. "You have until the end of the day to collect your things," Edward added, straightening his cufflinks without meeting Thomas's eyes. The rain was merciless as Thomas stumbled onto the streets, the thin envelope tucked under his arm, growing heavier with each passing second. The city blurred into a palette of gray and black, a world that had no place for him anymore. Taxis splashed through puddles, strangers huddled under umbrellas, and Thomas, once a master of this concrete kingdom, now stood utterly invisible. He wandered aimlessly, feet carrying him without thought. His mind replayed every late night spent in service, every moment he had given without question. Was it all meaningless? Had he truly been nothing more than a disposable cog in a heartless machine? Hours passed. Thomas found himself by the Thames, staring into the churning black water. He thought of all he had lost. Pride, reputation, future. And yet, as the rain soaked through his coat, chilling him to the bone, something else stirred within him. A slow, burning ember. Betrayal had carved him hollow, but inside that hollow space, a new thing was being born. Not despair. Not resignation. But resolve. Thomas Green would not be forgotten. He would not be discarded. If Empire Holdings wanted war, they would have it. And he would not stop until every one of them remembered the price of betrayal. The days that followed were a blur of shadows and silence. Thomas retreated into the corners of London, avoiding familiar places, ignoring the buzzing of his mobile phone. He was a ghost haunting the city he once commanded. Each morning he walked the misty streets, hidden beneath a weathered coat and battered hat, observing the indifferent march of life around him. But Thomas was not idle. Beneath the surface of his shattered life, a meticulous plan was forming. Years of navigating corporate mazes had sharpened his mind into a blade. Now, that blade would turn against those who had wronged him. He began with information. Empire Holdings had secrets, buried deep beneath its glittering facade. Thomas knew where to look. Late at night, in the dim light of an ancient library tucked between forgotten alleys, he unearthed the company's darker history. Illegal acquisitions, manipulated markets, suppressed scandals. The threads of corruption were everywhere, woven into the very fabric of the empire. He needed allies. People who had also been crushed by Empire Holdings, those discarded and broken like himself. He found them easily. A former IT specialist, dismissed without warning after raising concerns over data privacy violations. A brilliant accountant, scapegoated when a financial report uncovered missing millions. A legal assistant, silenced after uncovering illegal offshore accounts. They had all suffered under the same iron hand. At first they were wary. Hope was a dangerous thing for the betrayed. But Thomas spoke to them not with promises, but with cold truth. "We cannot undo what was done," he said quietly, as they huddled in the back of a dimly lit pub near the docks. "But we can ensure they pay the price." One by one, they nodded. In their eyes, Thomas saw the same flame that now burned within himself. Their first step was gathering evidence. Real evidence. Enough to shatter the illusion of invincibility Empire Holdings projected. They moved carefully, whispering through encrypted messages, meeting in forgotten corners of the city. Each piece they uncovered added to a growing arsenal. Emails detailing illegal mergers. Audio recordings of executives bribing officials. Financial documents hidden behind layers of shell companies. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. But Thomas knew exposure alone was not enough. Empire Holdings had survived storms before. It would survive a scandal if left to its own devices. No, he needed something bigger. Something that would not only reveal the rot within but would collapse the entire structure from the inside. He would make them turn on each other. Fear. Greed. Paranoia. These were weapons sharper than any knife. Thomas understood that the most powerful corporations were held together not by loyalty, but by mutual interest. Shatter that interest, and the entire edifice would crumble. One cold night, as mist rolled across the river, Thomas and his small team finalized the beginning of their campaign. They would leak carefully selected documents. Not enough to expose everything at once, but enough to breed suspicion. Enough to make the inner circle of Empire Holdings doubt one another. It was a dangerous game. If they moved too fast, they would be caught. If they moved too slowly, they would lose momentum. Timing would be everything. As the first encrypted package was prepared, Thomas stood by the window, watching the rain blur the lights of the city. His reflection stared back at him, hollowed and hardened. "You taught me everything I needed to know," he murmured under his breath. "Now, it is time to return the favor." The storm was no longer gathering. It had begun. It began quietly. One morning, Empire Holdings senior executives awoke to unsettling whispers crawling through the corridors of their gleaming tower. Anonymous emails circulated, hinting at betrayals within their ranks. Cryptic messages appeared pinned to office doors, implicating key figures in imagined conspiracies. No one knew where the information came from. No one knew who would be next. Thomas and his allies watched from the shadows, carefully stoking the flames. Every message, every leak, was meticulously designed. Some contained half-truths, others complete fabrications. The goal was not to reveal the full extent of Empire Holdings' corruption. Not yet. The goal was simple. Breed doubt, spark fear, and ignite paranoia. It worked better than Thomas had dared to hope. Within days, alliances that had been built over decades began to crumble. Board members whispered behind closed doors. Department heads sabotaged each other's meetings. Private investigators were hired in secret to spy on colleagues. Everyone was guilty in someone's eyes. Trust became a relic of the past. Meanwhile, the media caught the scent of blood. Rumors of misconduct and internal power struggles leaked into the press. Anonymous sources within the company, some fabricated by Thomas's team, fed tantalizing tidbits to hungry journalists. Tabloids printed headlines screaming of scandal. Financial news outlets speculated about instability at the heart of Empire Holdings. Investors grew restless. Stocks dipped ever so slightly, but significantly enough to cause alarm in the boardroom. The empire was starting to fracture. But Thomas was not done. The second phase of his plan was already in motion. Using the stolen financial records, Thomas created a maze of anonymous shell companies and fake subsidiaries. Through these ghost entities, he launched strategic attacks on Empire Holdings' interests, bidding wars for acquisitions, sudden closures of key supply chains, inexplicable lawsuits that clogged the company's legal department. Small cuts, precise and relentless, bleeding the giant slowly but surely. He remembered every lesson Empire Holdings had taught him about business warfare. Now, he twisted those lessons into weapons. One night, as the city slumbered under a blanket of mist, Thomas and his team gathered in a derelict warehouse by the Thames. A battered laptop glowed faintly in the darkness. They monitored the chaos they had sown, faces grim and determined. "They are tearing themselves apart," whispered Amelia, the former IT specialist, her voice a mix of awe and vengeance. Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. He knew better than to celebrate too early. Cornered beasts were the most dangerous. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A new message. Anonymous. No words, just a single attachment. A photograph of Thomas standing outside the warehouse earlier that evening. Someone was watching them. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of unease stirred in Thomas's chest. The enemy had noticed. The game was no longer entirely in his hands. Thomas stared at the photograph in disbelief, his mind racing. Someone had found them. Someone was close. He clenched his fists, forcing his thoughts into order. Panic would serve no purpose now. The plan was already too far in motion to stop. They had to push forward, carefully, but relentlessly. "We've been compromised," he said, his voice low but firm. "No more meetings here. No more visible gatherings. We go dark." The team nodded, expressions grim. Within an hour, the warehouse was abandoned, left to rot under the cold London fog. Thomas retreated into deeper secrecy, communicating with his allies only through encrypted channels. Each new move was now layered with extra precautions. Meanwhile, the slow bleeding of Empire Holdings continued, almost imperceptibly from the outside, but devastatingly clear within the company's fragile walls. Then came the first strike. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Empire Holdings' most lucrative real estate deal, a £1 billion redevelopment project near Canary Wharf, collapsed spectacularly. An anonymous bidder swooped in, offering outrageous prices to the landowners, leaving Empire Holdings outmaneuvered and humiliated. Investors panicked. Share prices dipped sharply for the first time. Inside the executive suites, tempers exploded. Accusations flew across the marble conference table. Board members turned on each other, each blaming the other for leaks, for weakness, for betrayal. CEO Charles Redgrave, once a towering figure of absolute authority, found himself isolated and surrounded by distrust. Thomas watched it all unfold from a small, nondescript cafe across the river, the rain drumming against the window like a funeral march. He sipped his coffee slowly, satisfaction threading through his veins. But he also knew that every victory carried a cost. The enemy was wounded now, but not yet dead. And wounded beasts could be savage. Later that night, Thomas received a second message. No words again. Just an image, the logo of Empire Holdings, scorched and broken. Underneath, a single line typed in blood-red letters. "We know." Thomas stared at the screen, his pulse steady. They were responding. Finally. He turned the phone off, placing it gently on the table. Around him, London pulsed with life, indifferent to the storm that brewed in the shadows. It was time to prepare for the next phase. Empire Holdings had drawn first blood in the past. Now, Thomas would teach them the true meaning of vengeance. And he would not stop until the heart of the empire itself lay in ashes. The air in London grew colder as autumn deepened. The city wore a grey shroud, mist rising from the Thames like ghostly fingers. Thomas moved through the streets like a shadow, each step measured, every glance sharp. The war he had unleashed was no longer a silent one. Empire Holdings had finally recognized the threat against them, and they were striking back. It started subtly. Surveillance cameras that always seemed to catch his figure at odd angles. Cars that lingered too long at street corners. Faces half hidden behind newspapers in cafes he frequented. Thomas adapted quickly, switching routes, using counter-surveillance techniques. But even he knew that no one could remain unseen forever. They were closing in, tightening their net, and it was only a matter of time before they would try something more direct. And they did. One night, while walking along a dim alley behind Borough Market, Thomas felt it, the faint scrape of footsteps not far behind. He turned into a service corridor, a maze of loading docks and abandoned stalls. The hunter had become the hunted. Without breaking stride, he slipped a hand into his coat. His fingers brushed the cold metal of the compact stun device he carried for emergencies. The first man lunged from the shadows, a heavy-set figure with a black cap pulled low. Thomas ducked, letting the man's momentum carry him forward, and struck hard with the stun device against the attacker's side. The man crumpled silently. But there was no time to breathe. A second figure emerged. Faster, more precise. This one was trained. Thomas barely dodged a swinging baton, feeling the whoosh of air by his ear. He kicked over a metal bin, sending it crashing into the attacker's legs, buying precious seconds. Sirens howled in the distance. Not for him, not yet, but too close to risk staying. Thomas fled through the winding alleys, slipping into the flood of night commuters at London Bridge. Heart pounding but face calm, he blended into the crowd. Back in his hideout, he tended to the bruises in silence. Empire Holdings had sent professionals now. This was no longer about outmaneuvering boardrooms or emptying bank accounts. This was war. And Thomas knew he could no longer fight it alone. He tapped a message into his encrypted phone, sending it to an old contact he had once vowed never to reach out to again. 4 simple words. I need your help. The reply came almost instantly. Location. Thomas smiled grimly. If Empire Holdings wanted to turn this into a blood sport, so be it. He would show them just how dangerous he could be when cornered. The empire was beginning to crack. And Thomas intended to tear it down, brick by brick. The rain hammered the abandoned railway station just outside London. It had once been a proud terminal in the age of steam trains, but now it stood in ruins, a skeleton of forgotten times. Puddles gleamed under the broken lamps. Rusted metal creaked with every gust of the cold night wind. Thomas waited near the old ticket booth, his coat soaked, hair dripping. He knew he was vulnerable out here. He also knew he had no choice. A figure emerged from the mist, moving with the quiet certainty of a predator. Tall, lean, and cloaked in a dark coat, the man stopped a few meters away, his face still hidden under the brim of a hat. You are late, Thomas said quietly. Had to make sure you were not followed, came the reply. The voice was low, rough like gravel dragged across stone. The man stepped forward into the flickering light. It was Marcus Vale, once the chief security strategist of Empire Holdings, and once Thomas's closest friend. Before Betrayal had torn them apart. Marcus studied him for a long moment, his eyes sharp and unreadable. You look terrible, he muttered. Thomas gave a thin smile. And you look exactly the same. That is what worries me. For a moment, neither spoke. The past hung heavy between them, a battlefield littered with broken promises and regrets. Then Marcus extended his hand. Thomas hesitated before gripping it firmly. An alliance had been forged again, not out of trust, but out of necessity. Inside the broken station, they spread a weathered map over a rusted bench. Pins, notes, and photographs cluttered the surface. This is bigger than you think, Marcus said. Empire Holdings has formed a special unit. Off-the-books operatives. Unlimited funding. They call it Blackwatch. Thomas frowned. And they sent Blackwatch after me? Marcus nodded grimly. They are scared. You have hit them harder than they expected. But fear makes them dangerous. Thomas leaned over the map, tracing a line between locations with his finger. We need to take out their nerve center, he said. Without it, their surveillance, their coordination, even Blackwatch, all of it collapses. Marcus smirked, still thinking like a chess player. Thomas shrugged. It worked so far. A distant thunder rumbled over the city. It sounded almost like a warning. Where is the nerve center? Thomas asked. Marcus pointed to a building circled twice in black ink. The old Crown Industries Tower. They bought it years ago, gutted it, turned it into their central operations hub. Thomas stared at the name. He remembered Crown Industries. It had once been a symbol of innovation before Empire Holdings had consumed and hollowed it. Poetic, he said under his breath. Marcus packed up the map swiftly. We will not get a second chance. Their security is brutal. Full biometric systems, rotating passcodes, underground vaults. And Blackwatch. Marcus smiled darkly. I will handle them. Thomas knew Marcus's skills well enough not to question that. They slipped into the night. 2 shadows with a single mission. Bring down the Empire. For Thomas, it was no longer just revenge. It was redemption. And there would be no mercy. The Crown Industries Tower loomed against the gray sky like a monument to forgotten ambition. Its sharp angles and blackened glass reflected the storm clouds swirling above, giving the whole structure a sinister, lifeless aura. Thomas and Marcus crouched behind a delivery van across the street. The rain had eased to a fine mist, but the air was thick with the tension of an invisible wire pulled taut. Thomas adjusted the earpiece Marcus had given him. Ready. Marcus's voice crackled through the calm. Thomas gave a short nod, knowing Marcus could see him through the thermal scope from a nearby rooftop. The tower's lobby was a cavern of cold marble and gleaming steel. Guards in dark uniforms patrolled in pairs, moving with mechanical precision. Timing would be everything. On Marcus's signal, Thomas slipped from cover, blending into a group of late-night cleaners entering the building. His disguise was simple but effective. A janitor's uniform, a forged ID badge, and the kind of weary expression no one ever questions. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Infiltrate. Disable the central core. Escape. Thomas moved through the building, pushing a cart laden with cleaning supplies. Hidden beneath the rags and mop handles were compact EMP devices, each one calibrated by Marcus to knock out specific systems without setting off alarms. His first target was the security substation on level 3. The corridor stretched ahead, silent except for the hum of overhead lights. At the end of the hall, a guard leaned against the wall, bored, scrolling through his phone. Thomas approached slowly, heart hammering in his chest. At the last moment, he dropped a mop, sending it clattering across the floor. The guard looked up, irritated but unconcerned. That was his mistake. In one swift movement, Thomas struck, using a taser concealed in his sleeve. The guard crumpled without a sound. Thomas dragged the unconscious man into a maintenance closet and pressed the first EMP against the substation panel. A soft pulse vibrated through the air, and the lights flickered momentarily. First layer down. Upstairs, Marcus's voice buzzed in Thomas's ear. Good. Cameras on levels 4 to 6 are blind. Move. Thomas took the service stairs, moving quickly but carefully. He could feel the minutes slipping away. On level 8, he encountered his first real obstacle. 2 Blackwatch operatives, fully armed, standing guard outside the lift leading to the server rooms. These were not rent-a-cops. These men moved with the ease of killers. Thomas knew he stood no chance in a firefight. He retreated back into the stairwell, heart racing, and reached into his cart. From a hidden compartment, he pulled out a smoke canister. Timing. Distance. Precision. He rolled the canister along the polished floor. A thin trail of smoke hissed out. The operatives tensed immediately, weapons raised. Using the distraction, Thomas moved swiftly. By the time the smoke thickened, he was already past them, slipping through the side entrance Marcus had highlighted on the blueprint. Inside the server room, the hum of machines filled the air, an electronic symphony of Empire holding surveillance empire. At the center stood the main core. Tall, silver, bristling with cables and cold blue light. Thomas approached, every step measured. He planted the final EMP device at the base of the core. Seconds stretched into hours as he armed the timer. 3 minutes. Enough time to vanish. But as Thomas turned, an alarm shrieked through the building. Someone had found the unconscious guard. Marcus's voice barked in his ear. Extraction point compromised. Plan B. South fire escape. Now. Thomas ran. Gunfire erupted behind him as Blackwatch operatives poured into the server room. Bullets sliced through the smoke. Splinters of metal and plastic rained down. Thomas ducked low, sprinting through the labyrinth of machines. He burst through the emergency exit, boots skidding on wet concrete. Above him, Marcus fired from his rooftop perch, covering Thomas's retreat. Thomas did not look back. There was no time. He reached the fire escape ladder and leapt, fingers scraping metal, pulling himself up with sheer desperation. The tower trembled as the EMP detonated. Lights flickered. Sparks flew. Inside, the heart of Empire Holdings died a sudden, brutal death. Thomas collapsed onto the rooftop of an adjacent building, chest heaving. Marcus appeared out of the mist, offering a hand. Together, they disappeared into the night, leaving only ruin behind. Empire Holdings had been wounded. But Thomas knew the real battle was only just beginning. The Empire would strike back. Harder. Deadlier. Without mercy. The old rail yard stretched into the distance, a graveyard of rusted metal and forgotten trains. The sun was beginning to rise, a faint smear of gold against the bruised, dark sky. Thomas and Marcus sat inside a derelict carriage, their breath misting in the cold air. Between them lay a battered laptop, its screen flickering with data streaming in from the ruins of Empire Holdings. It was done. The servers were crippled. The blackmail archives, the secret accounts, the networks of corruption, all exposed and bleeding into the world. Already, news outlets were scrambling to verify the flood of leaks. Politicians, CEOs, and power brokers who once moved in shadows were now dragged into the light, kicking and screaming. Marcus leaned back, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "We did it," he said, voice rough. But there was no triumph in it. Only exhaustion. Thomas nodded slowly. His body ached, and a hollow sadness gnawed at the edges of his mind. They had struck the giant. But the cost had been enormous. Behind them, the city stirred to life, unaware that the ground beneath it had shifted forever. Sirens wailed in the distance. Helicopters sliced through the misty morning air, searching. Thomas pulled the hood of his jacket low over his face. They would be hunted. There was no doubt. Empire Holdings had lost a battle. But the men behind it, the faceless architects of the machine, would not fall so easily. Marcus turned to Thomas, his eyes bloodshot but fierce. "What now?" Thomas stared out at the broken tracks stretching to the horizon. He thought of Ella, of the countless others destroyed by Empire Holdings' greed and cruelty. He thought of the nameless families left shattered, the whistleblowers silenced, the cities hollowed out by corruption. This was not about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger. Something older than both of them. Justice. "We keep going," Thomas said quietly. "We take it all down. Every last piece." Marcus grinned, a flash of the man he used to be before the war. "Then let's get to work." They gathered their things, moving quickly. Every second counted. By nightfall, Thomas and Marcus would be gone, leaving only ripples in their wake. The world would never know their names. There would be no statues, no medals, no celebrations. But somewhere in the dark corners of the earth, a few people would wake up freer than they had been the day before. And that was enough. Thomas slung the battered laptop under his arm. The first train of the morning roared past, heading east. Its whistle cut through the air like a call to arms. Without a word, they set off down the tracks, walking into the rising sun. The battle was over. The war had just begun.